Welcome back to Midnight Affair Tales. Thank you for joining us. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the dimly lit kitchen. Blaine stood frozen in the doorway, his military boots still dusty from the base. He had come home early to surprise his family, but something felt off. His wife Lila wasn't in bed. Instead, her phone sat on the counter, its screen glowing faintly. Blaine's brow furrowed as he moved closer, the smell of her floral perfume lingering in the air. The phone buzzed, the vibration loud in the stillness. He hesitated, glancing around to ensure he was alone, and then picked it up. A message popped up, bold and undeniable. "Can't wait to see you again tomorrow. Last night was unforgettable." Winking face. The words struck like a hammer to his chest. Blaine's hand trembled as he scrolled up. Pictures. Text. A name he didn't recognize, Wesley. A man who wasn't him. He heard a faint creak upstairs, the sound of someone moving quickly. His mind raced, his stomach churning with betrayal. Quietly, Blaine set the phone down and stepped back into the shadows of the hallway, his heart pounding like a drum. A soft laugh drifted from the top of the stairs, a laugh he didn't recognize. "Lila?" Blaine called out, his voice steady but laced with tension. The laughter stopped. Footsteps followed, hesitant and slow. Lila appeared at the top of the stairs, wrapped in a silk robe he'd never seen before. Her face paled as she spotted Blaine, her mouth opening to speak but no words coming out. "Who's here, Lila?" he asked, his voice calm but edged with steel. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Blaine's piercing gaze locked on hers, and for the first time in his life, he saw something in her eyes he never thought he'd see: guilt. Have you ever had a moment where everything you believed shattered in an instant? What would you do if the one you trusted most hid a truth you couldn't ignore? The air felt heavier that night, the walls of their home suddenly closing in around Blaine. He knew he was about to face something that would change everything. The silence in the house was broken only by the steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Blaine's gaze stayed locked on Lila, his soldier instincts kicking in as he analyzed her every twitch, every hesitation. She descended the stairs slowly, clutching the silk robe tighter around her body like a shield. The delicate scent of cologne, a man's cologne, lingered faintly in the air. It wasn't his. His fists clenched at his sides. "Who's here, Lila?" Blaine repeated, his voice deeper, sharper. This wasn't a question anymore. It was a demand. "No one," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes darted to the living room and Blaine caught it. He turned his head just enough to track her line of sight. The shadows in the corner shifted. Blaine's heart thundered in his chest, not from fear but from fury. He didn't need confirmation, but now he wanted it. His body moved before his mind could process. In 2 swift strides he was across the room, pulling back the curtain that shielded the large bay window. A man younger than him, with a smug smirk and a cocky demeanor, stood there as if he had every right to be in Blaine's home. "Well," Blaine said, his tone ice cold, "you must be Wesley." Wesley looked Blaine up and down, unbothered, which only fueled Blaine's anger. "And you must be the husband. You're home early." The audacity. Blaine's hands itched to strike, but years of military discipline held him back. "For now. You have 10 seconds to explain why you're here before I make sure you can't walk out," Blaine said, his voice low and dangerous. Lila stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Blaine, please don't." "Don't what?" Blaine snapped, his eyes flashing with rage. "Don't confront the man who's been sneaking into my house? Don't address the fact that my wife has been lying to me? Or maybe you think I should just turn a blind eye and let this continue?" Wesley chuckled softly and Blaine's eyes snapped to him. "You've got guts showing your face here," Blaine growled. "I'll give you that." "This isn't as bad as you think," Wesley said, his tone infuriatingly calm. "Lila and I." Blaine moved so fast that Wesley didn't see it coming. He grabbed the younger man by the collar and slammed him against the wall. "Don't you dare say her name," Blaine hissed. "Not in my house." Wesley's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of fear. Blaine's strength, honed from years of service, was undeniable. He could crush this man without breaking a sweat, and Wesley knew it. "Blaine, stop!" Lila cried, grabbing his arm. Her touch didn't soothe him this time, it burned. He let go of Wesley with a shove, sending the man stumbling. "Get out," Blaine barked, pointing toward the door. "Now." Wesley hesitated, looking to Lila for reassurance, but she averted her eyes. Blaine took a step forward and that was enough. Wesley scrambled for the door, throwing one last look over his shoulder before disappearing into the night. The moment the door slammed shut, Blaine turned to Lila. She backed away, tears streaming down her face, but Blaine didn't care. Not now. He'd given her everything, his loyalty, his trust, his love, and she had thrown it all away. How long? He asked, his voice cold and steady. Blaine, please? How long? The words were sharp, slicing through the air like a blade. Lila sobbed, covering her face with her hands. 6 months, she whispered. Blaine felt like the floor had been ripped out from under him, but he didn't show it. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing him crumble. Instead, he took a deep breath, his hands trembling at his sides. 6 months, he repeated, his tone devoid of emotion. 6 months of lies. 6 months of betrayal. While I was out there risking my life, protecting this family, you were here? He trailed off, his jaw tightening. I was lonely, Lila said, her voice cracking. You were gone for so long, Blaine. I needed someone. You needed someone? Blaine cut her off, his voice rising. You had me. Or did our marriage vows mean nothing to you? Lila sobbed harder, but Blaine had no sympathy left to give. He turned away, pacing the room as he tried to collect his thoughts. His mind raced, flashing back to moments that now felt like lies. Her distant glances, the sudden late-night errands, the phone she never let out of her sight. You brought him into our home, Blaine said, his voice quieter now but no less intense. The home we built together. The home where our daughter sleeps. Lila froze, her face pale. Blaine, please don't bring her into this. She's already in it. Blaine snapped. What happens when she finds out? What happens when she sees this family falling apart because of your selfishness? Lila sank to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Blaine stared at her, his anger warring with the love he once felt for her. He wanted to scream, to destroy something, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain she'd caused him. But he knew that wouldn't fix anything. Then a thought struck him, a darker, colder thought. Wesley. The man who had dared to touch what was his. Blaine wasn't done with him. Not by a long shot. Where does he live? Blaine asked suddenly. Lila looked up, her eyes wide with fear. What? Blaine, no. Where? Does he live? Lila shook her head frantically. Please, Blaine, don't do this. I made a mistake, but you can't. Can't what? Can't protect what's mine? Can't defend my family? Blaine's voice was a low growl. He hurt me, Lila. He hurt us. And I'm going to make sure he never does it again. Lila cried harder, but Blaine didn't wait for her response. He grabbed his keys and stormed out, his mind set on one thing, revenge. As he drove through the darkened streets, Blaine replayed every moment of the past 6 months in his head. The late nights, the secretive behavior, the lies. It all pointed back to Wesley. The man had been bold enough to step into Blaine's home, to look him in the eye without a shred of shame. That kind of arrogance couldn't go unanswered. When Blaine pulled up outside the address he'd found in Lila's phone, he felt a surge of adrenaline. The house was dark, the driveway empty. Blaine stepped out of the car, his boots crunching on the gravel. He didn't care if this ended badly for him. All he cared about was making sure Wesley understood the consequences of his actions. The door opened before Blaine could knock. Wesley stood there, his expression shifting from smug to terrified in an instant. You think you can just walk into my life and destroy it? Blaine said, his voice low and menacing. You think you can take what's mine and get away with it? Look, man, I didn't mean, Wesley started, but Blaine cut him off with a punch that sent him sprawling to the floor. You didn't mean to what? Blaine snarled, standing over him. Didn't mean to sleep with my wife? Didn't mean to hurt my family? Wesley scrambled back, holding up his hands in surrender. I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't cut it, Blaine said, his voice filled with cold fury. You're going to regret ever stepping into my life. Blaine didn't stop until Wesley understood the weight of his actions. By the time he walked away, leaving Wesley bruised and terrified, Blaine felt a strange sense of closure. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was enough for now. When Blaine returned home, Lila was waiting for him, her face etched with worry. What did you do? She whispered. Exactly what I had to, Blaine said, his voice steady. He walked past her, heading to his daughter's room. As he stood in the doorway watching her sleep peacefully, he made a silent vow. No one would ever hurt his family again. What would you do if you found yourself in Blaine's shoes? Could you forgive, or would you take justice into your own hands? The quiet of the morning felt unsettling. Blaine sat at the kitchen table, the smell of freshly brewed coffee filling the air, though he didn't take a sip. The events of the night before played like a broken record in his mind. Lila's confession, Wesley's smirk, the confrontation. Every muscle in his body was coiled with tension, every nerve screaming for action. He wasn't a man who broke easily. The military had trained him to stay steady under fire, to think strategically even in the face of chaos. But this wasn't war, at least not the kind he was used to. This was personal, and the battlefield was his own home. Lila tiptoed into the kitchen, her expression hesitant. She wore a cardigan over her pajamas, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. Blaine didn't even glance at her. His hands were wrapped around the coffee mug, his knuckles white. "Blaine," she began softly. He held up a hand, silencing her. "Don't," he said firmly. His tone was calm, but there was an edge to it that sent a shiver down her spine. She sat across from him, fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. "I know I've destroyed your trust. I know I've hurt you." "Hurt me?" Blaine interrupted, his gaze snapping to hers. His eyes burned with intensity, making her shrink back slightly. "You didn't just hurt me, Lila. You broke everything we built together. You invited another man into our home, into our lives. Do you even realize what you've done?" Tears filled her eyes, but Blaine wasn't moved. He had no patience for her tears, not when his entire world had been upended by her actions. "Why, Lila?" he demanded, his voice rising slightly. "Was it worth it? Was he worth it?" She shook her head, her voice trembling. "I don't know. I was lonely, Blaine. You were gone so much and I felt invisible. I never meant for it to go this far." "This far?" Blaine echoed, his anger barely contained. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Do you even hear yourself? You didn't just slip up once. You made a choice, over and over again, for 6 months." She flinched as he paced the room, his energy like a storm threatening to break loose. "What about us? What about our daughter?" Blaine asked, his voice cracking slightly, not with weakness but with frustration. "You risked everything. Do you know what that makes me feel like? Like I've been fighting for a family that doesn't even exist anymore." "I made a mistake," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I love you, Blaine. I love our family." "You don't love me," Blaine said coldly, stopping to face her. "If you did, you wouldn't have betrayed me. Love isn't just words, Lila. It's actions. And your actions have told me everything I need to know." She sobbed into her hands, but Blaine didn't offer comfort. Instead, he grabbed his jacket and car keys, pausing only to look at her with an expression she had never seen before, one of complete and utter disappointment. "I'm going to figure out how to handle this," he said. "But don't think for a second that this is something we can just move past." As he walked out the door, his mind was already working. He wasn't just going to sit around and let this happen. He wasn't the kind of man who wallowed in defeat. Blaine was a soldier, a strategist, and this betrayal was a battle he intended to win. The sun was high in the sky by the time Blaine arrived at the park where he often came to clear his mind. The serene surroundings did little to calm him, but they gave him space to think. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through Lila's messages again. Each text, each photo, each damning piece of evidence only fueled his anger. Wesley's cocky face flashed in his mind and Blaine's jaw clenched. This wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. It was about the audacity of the man who had so brazenly invaded his life, who had disrespected him in the worst possible way. Blaine wasn't going to let him walk away unscathed. He opened a search on his phone, finding Wesley's workplace. It was a small financial consulting firm across town. Blaine memorized the address, his mind racing with possibilities. He knew he couldn't just storm in and make a scene. He wasn't reckless. But he could gather intel, understand his enemy. Wesley had made the first move, but Blaine would make the last. Later that evening, Blaine parked his car a block away from the firm. He stepped out, his military boots hitting the pavement with purpose. His years of training kicked in as he moved silently, blending into the shadows. He wasn't here to confront Wesley, not yet. This was reconnaissance. The building was modern, with large glass windows that allowed him to see into the brightly lit lobby. Wesley was there, laughing with a coworker, completely unaware of Blaine's presence. Blaine's fists clenched as he observed him. This man had wormed his way into Blaine's life, taken advantage of his wife's vulnerability, and acted like he had nothing to lose. But Blaine was going to show him otherwise. By the time Blaine returned home, it was late. The house was quiet, the lights dimmed. He checked on his daughter first, watching her sleep peacefully. The sight brought him a moment of calm. This was what he was fighting for, his family, his daughter's future. Lila was waiting for him in the living room, her face pale and drawn. She stood as he entered, her hands wringing nervously. "Blaine," she began, but he held up a hand to stop her. "I'm not interested in apologies right now," he said firmly. "I'm interested in solutions. Tell me everything. I want to know every detail, every time you saw him, every time you let him into our lives." She hesitated, but the look in his eyes left no room for argument. Slowly she began to speak, her voice trembling as she recounted the affair. Each word felt like a knife, but Blaine forced himself to listen. He needed the truth no matter how painful. When she finished, he nodded curtly. "Good," he said. "Now I know exactly what I'm dealing with." "Blaine, please," she said, her voice breaking. "I'll do anything to make this right." "You don't get to decide what's right anymore," Blaine said coldly. "You made your choices, Lila. Now it's my turn." He left her standing there, tears streaming down her face as he retreated to the spare bedroom. Sleep didn't come easily, but Blaine didn't need rest. He needed a plan. The next morning, Blaine was up early, his mind clear and focused. He had always been a man of action, and this situation was no different. Lila's betrayal had shaken him, but it hadn't broken him. If anything, it had reminded him of who he was, a fighter, a protector. He wasn't going to let this destroy him or his family. Wesley thought he had won, but he had underestimated Blaine. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. What would you do if someone tried to tear apart everything you've built? Would you stand by, or would you fight back with everything you've got? The following day, Blaine didn't waste time. He had spent the night piecing together every detail, every angle, and now he had a clear picture. The first step was ensuring his daughter's safety. There was no room for compromise. As he sat at the dining table, sipping his black coffee, he saw Lila approach cautiously. Her eyes were puffy from crying, her face a mask of regret. "Blaine," she began softly, but he didn't look up. "Get her ready for school," he said curtly, his tone leaving no room for argument. Lila swallowed hard and nodded, disappearing down the hallway. Blaine waited until he heard his daughter's cheerful voice, blissfully unaware of the storm raging in her home. He left shortly after them, his mind set on his next move. Wesley wasn't going to get away with this, not after stepping into his life and threatening his family. Blaine's military instincts had already mapped out a plan. He wasn't going to confront Wesley blindly. This time he would attack where it hurt the most. Blaine's first stop was Wesley's office again, but this time he wasn't there for observation. He had done his homework the night before, digging into Wesley's records, social media, and any trace of his life he could find online. The arrogance of men like Wesley always left trails, and Blaine knew exactly how to exploit them. He walked into the firm, his broad shoulders and military stance immediately drawing attention. The receptionist looked up, her friendly smile faltering under Blaine's piercing gaze. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked nervously. "I need to speak to Wesley Mason," Blaine said, his tone sharp and direct. The woman hesitated. "I'm sorry, but he's not available right now. Do you have an appointment?" "No," Blaine replied, leaning in slightly. "But I'm sure he'll want to make time for me." The receptionist shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing the tension. Blaine's presence was commanding, impossible to ignore. "I'll see if he's free," she mumbled, picking up the phone. Moments later, Wesley appeared, his face carefully neutral. But Blaine could see the flicker of unease in his eyes. "Blaine," Wesley said, forcing a smile. "Didn't expect to see you here." "We need to talk," Blaine said simply. Wesley glanced around the office, clearly not wanting to make a scene. "Fine. Let's step outside." They walked out to the parking lot, the tension between them palpable. As soon as they were out of earshot, Blaine turned to face him, his expression cold and unyielding. "You think this is over?" Blaine asked, his voice low but dangerous. "You think you can walk into my life, destroy my family, and walk away without consequences?" Wesley's smirk returned, though it lacked the confidence it had before. "Look, man, I get it. You're upset. But it's not like I forced her." Blaine didn't let him finish. His hand shot out, gripping Wesley's collar and slamming him against the side of a car. Wesley's eyes widened in shock as Blaine leaned in, his face inches away. "Don't you dare try to justify this," Blaine growled. "You came into my home, into my life. You disrespected me, my marriage, and my daughter. And now you're going to pay for it?" Okay. Wesley sputtered, raising his hands in surrender. Just calm down, man." Blaine released him with a shove and Wesley stumbled back, his confidence completely shattered. Blaine straightened his jacket, his eyes never leaving Wesley's. "This isn't over," Blaine said. "Stay out of my life or I swear you'll regret it." Wesley nodded quickly, his bravado completely gone. Blaine turned and walked away, leaving the younger man shaken and speechless. When Blaine returned home, he found Lila sitting on the couch, her face buried in her hands. She looked up as he entered, her eyes filled with desperation. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I handled it," Blaine said simply, his tone giving no indication of what had transpired. "Blaine, this isn't who you are," she said, standing and approaching him. "You don't know who I am anymore," Blaine replied, his voice sharp. "You lost that privilege the moment you decided to betray me." She flinched at his words, tears streaming down her face. "I made a mistake. A horrible mistake. But I love you. I want to fix this." Blaine shook his head, his expression hard. "You can't fix this, Lila. What you've done can't be undone. Please," she begged, her voice breaking. "Don't give up on us." Blaine stared at her for a long moment, his emotions warring within him. Part of him wanted to believe her, to hope that their family could survive this. But another part, the stronger part, knew that some wounds didn't heal. "You made your choice," he said finally. "Now I have to make mine." He turned and walked away, leaving Lila sobbing in the living room. His mind was made up. He would protect his daughter, but his trust in Lila was gone, shattered beyond repair. As he sat alone in the spare bedroom that night, Blaine felt a sense of clarity. He wasn't a weak man. He wasn't a man who let others dictate his life. He would move forward, stronger than ever, for himself and for his daughter. This wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where he reclaimed control and refused to let betrayal define him. The sun had barely risen when Blaine walked into the garage, his mind razor-sharp and his heart a molten core of fury. His military knife sat on the workbench, gleaming under the dim light. He picked it up, the weight familiar in his hands. It wasn't a weapon for a fight, yet, but it reminded him of who he was. A soldier. A protector. A man who wouldn't tolerate anyone threatening his family. He slid the knife into its sheath, his mind replaying the conversation with Wesley in the parking lot. That man's smugness, the audacity to still try to downplay what he'd done, it ignited something primal in Blaine. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about reclaiming his honor. Blaine drove to a storage facility on the edge of town. He had rented the unit years ago to store personal items, but it was more than that. It was a space for things he didn't want in his house. A reminder of the man he was before he became a husband and father. The man who could do what needed to be done without hesitation. Inside he opened a locked trunk. His military gear lay neatly packed. A tactical vest, gloves, and a small, untraceable firearm he'd acquired overseas. He didn't plan to use it, not unless Wesley forced his hand. But Blaine didn't believe in leaving things to chance. By the time Blaine arrived at Wesley's house, the sun was high, casting stark shadows across the neatly trimmed lawn. He parked a block away and approached on foot, his every movement deliberate and controlled. Wesley's car was in the driveway, the sleek sports car practically screaming arrogance. Blaine didn't knock. He didn't need an invitation. The front door was unlocked, a sign of carelessness, another weakness Wesley wouldn't get away with. Blaine pushed it open and stepped inside, the air thick with the faint smell of cologne. "Wesley." Blaine's voice thundered through the house, startling a young woman who appeared from the kitchen. She froze, her eyes wide. "Who are you?" she asked, clutching a dish towel like it could protect her. "Where is he?" Blaine demanded, his tone so sharp it cut through the air. The woman hesitated, then pointed toward the back of the house. "In his office," she whispered. Blaine nodded once, his jaw set. He strode down the hallway, his boots heavy on the hardwood floors. The door to the office was ajar, and inside, Wesley sat at a desk, typing on his laptop as if his world wasn't on the verge of collapse. When Blaine stepped into the room, Wesley looked up, his expression twisting from annoyance to fear in an instant. "You again?" he said, pushing back from the desk. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" Blaine didn't respond. He reached behind him, pulling the knife from its sheath and slamming it into the desk with a force that made Wesley flinch. "You think I'm here to talk?" Blaine said, his voice low and deadly. Wesley swallowed hard, his hands trembling as he raised them in surrender. Okay, let's calm down, all right?" "Calm?" Blaine repeated, his lip curling in disdain. "You destroyed my family. You walked into my house, my life, and you expect me to stay calm?" Wesley opened his mouth to respond, but Blaine slammed his fist down on the desk, silencing him. "You're a coward," Blaine spat. "Hiding behind your charm, thinking you can take what you want without consequences. But you made a mistake, Wesley. You underestimated me." "I didn't mean for this to happen," Wesley stammered. It just happened?" Blaine cut him off, his voice rising. "You think that excuses it? You think that erases the damage you've done?" He leaned closer, his eyes blazing. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Wesley's face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead. "Look, I'll stay away. I swear. You'll never see me again." Blaine smirked, but there was no humor in it. "You're damn right I won't. Because if I do, I won't stop at warnings." He grabbed the knife and turned, leaving Wesley shaking in his chair. Blaine didn't need to do more. Wesley's terror was enough. For now. When Blaine returned home, he found Lila waiting for him in the living room. She stood as he entered, her eyes searching his face for answers. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I dealt with it," Blaine said simply, his tone brooking no argument. "Blaine, please," she said, stepping closer. "We need to talk." He didn't stop her as she approached, but his expression was cold, unreadable. "I made a mistake," she began, her voice breaking. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. For us. For our daughter." Blaine's gaze didn't waver. "Do you even understand what you've done?" he asked, his voice sharp. "You didn't just betray me. You betrayed our family. Our trust. And trust isn't something you just fix. It's earned. And you've destroyed it." Tears streamed down her face, but Blaine didn't soften. He had loved her, deeply, unconditionally. But love wasn't enough to erase what she'd done. "I don't know if we can come back from this," he said finally, his voice quieter but no less firm. "Blaine, please," she whispered, reaching for his hand. He let her take it, but his grip was loose, detached. "This isn't about you anymore," he said. "It's about what's best for our daughter. And right now, I don't know if staying together is what's best." Her sobs filled the room as Blaine pulled his hand away, walking toward the stairs. He paused at the bottom step, his voice calm but final. "I'll protect her, Lila. No matter what. But as for us..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "You made your choice." As he climbed the stairs, Lila collapsed onto the couch, her sobs echoing through the empty space. Blaine didn't look back. He had a daughter to protect, a life to rebuild. And he would do it on his terms. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Blaine stood in the doorway of his daughter's bedroom, watching her sleep. Her tiny chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, her peaceful innocence a stark contrast to the chaos swirling in his life. He clenched his fists, his jaw tightening as the image of Wesley flashed in his mind again. This wasn't just about him or Lila anymore. This was about his daughter, Hazel. She was only 7, too young to understand the cracks that had formed in her family, but Blaine knew it wouldn't be long before the truth spilled over. The thought of Wesley being anywhere near her sent a fresh surge of fury through him. Wesley had already trespassed in his marriage. Blaine would die before letting that man get anywhere near Hazel. The next morning, Blaine's instincts told him something was wrong. Hazel had been unusually quiet at breakfast, her usual chatter replaced by one-word answers. Lila had avoided Blaine's gaze, her guilt hanging in the air like a storm cloud. As Blaine packed Hazel's lunch, she tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy," she said softly, her big blue eyes filled with hesitation. "What is it, sweetheart?" he asked, crouching to her level. "Yesterday a man came to school," she said. "He said he was Mommy's friend." Blaine's entire body stiffened. "What did he say to you?" Hazel glanced down, fidgeting with the hem of her dress. "He just asked if I liked animals. He said he had a puppy in his car." Blaine's blood ran cold. He grabbed Hazel's shoulders gently but firmly, his eyes locking onto hers. Hazel, listen to me. Did you go with him? She shook her head quickly. No, Daddy. Miss Turner came and told him to leave. She said he shouldn't be talking to kids. Relief flooded Blaine's chest, but it was short-lived. The fury followed quickly, burning hotter than ever. Wesley had crossed a line Blaine couldn't ignore. Blaine wasted no time. He dropped Hazel off at school himself, making sure to speak with her teacher and the principal. He didn't sugarcoat the situation, making it clear that no one other than him or Lila was to pick up Hazel. He also left a picture of Wesley, ensuring the school staff knew exactly who to watch out for. The drive to Wesley's house was a blur. Blaine's knuckles were white against the steering wheel, his mind racing. He had given Wesley a warning, but the man clearly hadn't listened. Now Blaine was done playing games. When he arrived, the front door was locked, but Blaine wasn't deterred. He circled around to the back, finding an open window. Without hesitation, he climbed inside, his movements silent and precise. Wesley was in the kitchen, completely unaware of Blaine's presence. He was humming to himself, a smug smile on his face as he poured a cup of coffee. Blaine stepped into the room, his boots heavy against the tile floor. Wesley turned, the cup slipping from his hand and shattering on the floor. What the hell? You think you can talk to my daughter? Blaine growled, his voice low and menacing. He advanced, and Wesley backed into the counter, his hands raised. I didn't, Wesley stammered, but Blaine didn't let him finish. He grabbed Wesley by the shirt and slammed him against the wall. You don't get to lie your way out of this, Blaine snarled. You went to her school. You tried to lure her. Do you have any idea what I'll do to you if you go near her again? Wesley's eyes widened in terror. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I swear. You don't get to explain, Blaine said, his voice colder than ice. You've already done enough damage. And now you've made it personal. Wesley's breath came in short, panicked bursts. Look, I'll leave town, okay? I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. Blaine released him, letting him fall to the floor in a heap. He stood over Wesley, his presence looming like a dark shadow. You're right, Blaine said, his voice quiet but lethal. You will disappear. And if I ever see your face again, I won't stop at warnings. Wesley nodded frantically, scrambling to his feet. I'll go. I'll go right now. Blaine didn't move as Wesley bolted from the house, his footsteps echoing in the hallway. It wasn't until the door slammed shut that Blaine finally let out the breath he had been holding. When Blaine returned home, he found Lila pacing the living room. She looked up as he entered, her expression a mix of relief and fear. Where were you? She asked. Taking care of things, Blaine said curtly. Blaine, you can't keep doing this, she said, her voice trembling. You're scaring me. You should be scared, Blaine replied, his tone sharp. You brought this into our lives, Lila. You opened the door to this chaos. I know, she said, tears streaming down her face. I know I ruined everything. But please don't let this destroy us. Blaine stared at her, his expression unreadable. You already destroyed us, Lila. I'm just trying to pick up the pieces. He walked past her, heading to Hazel's room. He needed to see her, to remind himself of what he was fighting for. As he stood in the doorway watching her play with her toys, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't over, not until his family was safe. The air in the house was suffocating. Lila sat on the couch, her legs drawn up to her chest, staring blankly at the wall. Blaine's words from the night before still echoed in her mind. You made your choice. Now I have to make mine. Hazel's laughter floated faintly from her room upstairs, a stark reminder of the innocence still lingering in the chaos. Lila couldn't stop trembling. She knew Blaine was serious, that he wasn't a man to bluff. The strength that had always made her feel safe now terrified her. When Blaine entered the house, his expression was unreadable, his movements calculated and silent. He tossed his jacket onto the arm of a chair and stared at Lila, who didn't dare to meet his gaze. Did you know? He asked coldly. She blinked, confused. Know what? That Wesley went to Hazel's school. Lila froze, her face draining of color. What? No. No, I didn't know. His jaw tightened, the muscles flexing under his skin. He approached her. Tried to talk to her. Used the same manipulative charm he used on you? Lila's hand flew to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Oh my God. Blaine, I swear I didn't. Save it, Blaine snapped, his voice like a whip. I don't want your excuses. I want you to understand how far this has gone because of you. She started to sob, but he turned away, his mind already moving to the next step. Blaine wasn't the kind of man who let emotions cloud his judgment. He had learned to compartmentalize, to focus on the mission. And right now, the mission was ensuring Wesley never posed a threat to his daughter, or anyone else, again. The next day Blaine didn't go to work. Instead, he spent the morning gathering every bit of information he had on Wesley. He mapped out his routine, tracked his movements, and noted every vulnerability. Blaine had spent years studying enemies in the field, learning how to predict their actions. Wesley was no different. By afternoon, Blaine was parked outside Wesley's favorite bar. The younger man had no idea he was being watched, his arrogance blinding him to the storm brewing on the horizon. Blaine watched as Wesley laughed with his friends, his carefree demeanor grating against Blaine's already frayed nerves. He waited until Wesley left, walking alone to his car in the dimly lit parking lot. Blaine followed at a distance, his boots silent against the asphalt. When Wesley unlocked his car, Blaine stepped out of the shadows. "Wesley," he said, his voice calm but deadly. Wesley froze, turning slowly. His eyes widened when he saw Blaine and he took an instinctive step back. "What are you doing here?" Blaine didn't answer. Instead, he closed the distance between them in 3 quick strides, grabbing Wesley by the front of his shirt and slamming him against the car. "You think you can walk away from this?" Blaine growled. "You think you can threaten my family and get away with it?" Wesley stammered, his cocky facade crumbling under Blaine's fury. "I wasn't, look man, I didn't mean." "You didn't mean to what?" Blaine spat, his face inches from Wesley's. "Didn't mean to betray me? Didn't mean to hurt my daughter? You crossed a line, Wesley. And now, I'm going to make sure you regret it." Blaine released him with a shove, sending him sprawling onto the ground. He loomed over Wesley, his presence overwhelming. "Leave town," Blaine said, his voice cold and final. "Don't pack. Don't say goodbye. Just disappear. If I ever see you again, you won't be walking away next time." Wesley nodded frantically, scrambling to his feet. He didn't even try to argue. The fear in his eyes told Blaine he understood. As Wesley drove away, Blaine watched until the taillights disappeared into the distance. It wasn't over, not completely, but it was a start. When Blaine returned home, Lila was waiting for him in the kitchen. She looked up as he entered, her eyes red and swollen. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I handled it," Blaine replied simply, his tone leaving no room for discussion. "Blaine, you can't just—" "I can and I will," he interrupted, his gaze cutting through her like a blade. "You don't get to tell me what I can't do anymore. Not after what you've done." She flinched, but he didn't soften. Blaine was done playing the forgiving husband. He wasn't weak and he wasn't going to let Lila's betrayal define him. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What happens now," Blaine said, stepping closer, "is that you stay out of my way. My only priority is Hazel. You lost your place in this family the moment you let that man into our lives." Lila broke down, collapsing into a chair as sobs racked her body. Blaine didn't look back as he left the room, his focus already shifting to the next phase. Wesley may have been scared off for now, but Blaine wasn't taking any chances. He would make sure his family was safe, no matter what it took. The night was heavy with tension as Blaine stood in the dimly lit living room, staring at a map spread across the coffee table. It wasn't a map of some distant battlefield, it was a map of Wesley's world. Blaine had tracked his patterns, dug into his history, and unearthed everything he needed to know. This wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about ending the threat once and for all. Upstairs, Hazel slept peacefully, her small form curled under a blanket. Blaine had kissed her goodnight, silently vowing to protect her no matter the cost. In the adjacent room, Lila lay awake, the weight of her betrayal suffocating her. She had tried to talk to Blaine again, but his resolve was unshakable. The sound of Blaine zipping up his duffel bag broke the silence. Inside were the tools he needed, not for war but for precision. A dark hoodie, gloves, duct tape, and a crowbar. He didn't plan to leave anything to chance. Wesley had ignored the warnings, pushed the boundaries, and now Blaine was done playing fair. Blaine parked his car a block away from Wesley's apartment complex, blending into the shadows as he approached the building. The night was quiet, the occasional hum of a passing car the only sound. Blaine moved with the calculated precision of a soldier, his footsteps silent, his breathing steady. He had scoped out the place earlier. Wesley lived alone, no roommates, no nosy neighbors. The perfect setting for what Blaine had planned. He picked the lock on the front door with practiced ease, slipping inside and closing it softly behind him. The apartment was dark, save for the faint glow of a TV in the living room. Wesley sat on the couch, his feet propped up on the coffee table, a beer in his hand. He was completely unaware of Blaine's presence. Blaine's lip curled in disgust. This man had dared to step into his life, to threaten his family, and now he was lounging as if he owned the world. Blaine's grip tightened on the crowbar in his hand. "Wesley," Blaine said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Wesley jerked upright, his beer spilling onto the carpet. His eyes widened as he saw Blaine standing there, his silhouette menacing in the dim light. "Blaine, what the hell?" Wesley stammered, scrambling to his feet. "You ignored my warning," Blaine said, his tone cold and unrelenting. "You came near my daughter. You don't get to walk away this time." Wesley backed away, his hands raised. "Look man, I swear I wasn't trying to hurt her. I just wanted to talk." Blaine advanced, his movements deliberate and controlled. "You wanted to talk?" he repeated, his voice rising. "You don't talk to a man's child. You don't step into his life and tear it apart. You don't get to decide what's harmless." Wesley hit the wall, his back pressed against it as Blaine loomed over him. "I'll leave, okay? I'll leave town. You'll never see me again?" Blaine's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening on the crowbar. "You've said that before. Forgive me if I don't believe you." Wesley's breathing was ragged, his fear palpable. "Please, Blaine. I'm sorry. I made a mistake." "A mistake?" Blaine snarled, his voice dripping with venom. "You didn't just make a mistake. You made a choice. And now you live with the consequences." In one swift motion, Blaine swung the crowbar, striking the wall just inches from Wesley's head. The impact was deafening, the drywall cracking under the force. Wesley flinched, his body trembling. "I could end this right now," Blaine said, his voice low and deadly. "But I won't. Because you're not worth it." He stepped back, his gaze never leaving Wesley's. "You have until sunrise to leave this town. If you're still here when the sun comes up, I won't stop next time." Wesley nodded frantically, his words tumbling over each other. "I'll go. I swear I'll go." Blaine turned and walked out, leaving Wesley shaking and pale. He didn't need to look back, he knew Wesley wouldn't dare to stay. When Blaine returned home, the first rays of dawn were breaking over the horizon. The house was quiet, the world still. He climbed the stairs and paused outside Hazel's room, listening to the soft sound of her breathing. He opened the door and stepped inside, sitting on the edge of her bed. Hazel stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Daddy?" she murmured sleepily. "It's okay, sweetheart," Blaine said softly, brushing her hair from her face. "Go back to sleep." Hazel smiled faintly and closed her eyes, drifting off again. Blaine stayed there for a long moment, his heart heavy but resolute. Down the hall, Lila watched from the doorway, her expression unreadable. She didn't say anything as Blaine left Hazel's room and walked past her. "Blaine?" she finally whispered. He stopped but didn't turn around. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice trembling. "For now," Blaine said. He continued down the stairs, his footsteps heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. The battle wasn't over, not completely. But Blaine knew one thing for certain. He would do whatever it took to protect his daughter. And no one would ever hurt her again. The days that followed were a blur of quiet routines and unspoken tension. Blaine had forced Wesley out of town, and for the moment the threat felt neutralized. But the scars of betrayal remained, raw and aching, a constant reminder of how fragile trust could be. Hazel, blissfully unaware, continued her days as if nothing had happened. She laughed at cartoons, colored pictures at the kitchen table, and hugged Blaine tightly every night before bed. For her, life was still innocent, untouched by the shadows that loomed over her parents. Lila, on the other hand, was a shell of herself. She moved through the house like a ghost, her guilt weighing her down. Blaine barely spoke to her, his silence a punishment sharper than any words. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Lila found Blaine sitting on the porch. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, his expression unreadable. "Can I sit?" she asked tentatively. He didn't answer, but he didn't tell her to leave either. She took the silence as permission and sat down beside him, her hands folded in her lap. I know I can't undo what I've done, she began, her voice trembling. But I need you to know how sorry I am. For everything. Blaine didn't look at her. His jaw tightened, the muscle twitching as he considered her words. I don't know if I can forgive you, Lila, he said finally, his voice low and steady. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed our family. You put our daughter in danger. How am I supposed to move past that? Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away, determined to face the consequences of her actions. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said. I want to fix this. I want to fix us. Blaine let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. Fix us, he repeated. You think it's that simple? Trust isn't something you can patch up with apologies, Lila. It's built over time through actions. And you've destroyed it? She looked down, her hands trembling. I know. But I'll do whatever it takes, Blaine. I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that I can be better, that I can be the wife and mother you deserve. Blaine was silent for a long moment, his mind warring with itself. Part of him wanted to believe her, to hope that they could rebuild what had been broken. But another part, the stronger part, knew that some wounds didn't heal. For now, my only priority is Hazel, he said finally. She deserves a stable home, a safe environment. And I'll do whatever it takes to give her that. But as for us, I don't know if there's an us anymore. Lila's breath hitched, the finality of his words cutting through her like a knife. She nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. I understand, she whispered. Blaine stood, his towering presence casting a shadow over her. I'll protect her, Lila, he said firmly. No matter what. That's the only thing that matters now. In the weeks that followed, Blaine's focus remained on Hazel. He picked her up from school every day, attended her recitals, and helped her with her homework at the kitchen table. He poured every ounce of his energy into being the father she needed, the protector she deserved. Lila stayed in the background, her presence a quiet reminder of the fractures in their family. She tried to make amends, cooking Blaine's favorite meals, tidying the house, and spending as much time as she could with Hazel. But Blaine's walls remained up, impenetrable and unyielding. One evening, as Blaine tucked Hazel into bed, she looked up at him with wide, curious eyes. Daddy, why doesn't Mommy smile anymore? She asked innocently. Blaine's heart clenched, but he forced a smile. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, sweetheart, he said gently. But it doesn't mean they don't love you. Are you mad at her? Hazel asked. Blaine hesitated, his throat tightening. It's complicated, he said finally. But you don't need to worry about that, okay? Mommy and Daddy both love you very much. Hazel nodded, her trust in her father unwavering. Blaine kissed her forehead and turned off the light, his heart heavy as he closed the door behind him. Late that night, Blaine sat alone in the living room, the weight of everything pressing down on him. He stared at the family photo on the mantel. Him, Lila, and Hazel, smiling brightly on a sunny day. It felt like a lifetime ago, a memory from a different world. His phone buzzed on the coffee table, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a text from an unknown number. I'm gone. You'll never hear from me again. Blaine stared at the message for a long moment, his grip tightening on the phone. Wesley's absence didn't erase the damage he had done, but it was a start. Blaine deleted the text and leaned back against the couch, closing his eyes. The battle wasn't over, not entirely. But for the first time in weeks, Blaine felt a glimmer of peace. He had fought for his family, for his daughter, and for his own dignity. And no matter what lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain. He would never let anyone hurt them again. Blaine sat in the stillness of the night, the faint sound of the clock ticking in the living room. His mind was a battlefield, replaying moments over and over again, searching for clarity, for signs he might have missed. His instincts as a soldier had always been sharp, trained to see threats before they emerged. But this time the enemy had come from within, from the very person he had trusted most. As he sifted through his thoughts, something clicked. He remembered a night months ago, a night that now felt tainted in retrospect. Blaine leaned back, his hands clasped tightly, and let the memory unfold. It had been a warm summer evening, the kind of night that usually brought peace after a long day. Blaine had returned home late from a mission briefing at the base, his body exhausted but his heart eager to see his family. When he walked in, the house was unusually quiet. Hazel was already asleep, and the faint sound of laughter drifted from the backyard. Blaine followed it, expecting to see Lila on the phone with her sister or a friend. But when he stepped outside, the sight before him stopped him in his tracks. Lila was sitting on the patio, her face lit by the glow of string lights. Across from her sat a man Blaine didn't recognize, a man who was leaning in just a little too close, his hand brushing hers as he passed her a glass of wine. Blaine's eyes narrowed. "Lila?" She jumped, her hand jerking back as if burned. The man turned, his smile fading as he caught sight of Blaine. "Blaine," Lila said, her voice tinged with guilt and surprise. "You're home early?" "That's Wesley," she added quickly, gesturing to the man. "He's a co-worker." Blaine stepped closer, his presence commanding as his eyes bore into Wesley. "Nice to meet you," he said, his voice flat. Wesley stood, extending a hand, but Blaine ignored it. Instead he looked at Lila, his expression unreadable. "Didn't realize we were hosting guests tonight?" "It was last minute," Lila said, her voice shaky. "He needed help with a project?" Blaine's jaw tightened. Something felt off, but he couldn't put his finger on it. Wesley's demeanor was too casual, too comfortable for a man who was supposedly here for work. "Well," Blaine said, his tone sharp, "I think it's time to wrap it up." "It's late?" Wesley hesitated, glancing at Lila, who gave him a weak smile. "Yeah, of course. Thanks for the wine, Lila." As Wesley walked past Blaine, he could feel the weight of Blaine's glare. He didn't dare look back. Once they were alone, Blaine turned to Lila. "What the hell was that?" "What?" she said defensively. "He's just a coworker. A coworker who sits in my backyard, drinking wine with my wife while I'm at work?" Blaine's voice rose, his frustration clear. "Do you think I'm stupid?" "No, Blaine, I don't," he interrupted, his tone icy. "I don't like this. I don't trust him. And I don't trust whatever this is." Lila crossed her arms, her expression hurt. "You're overreacting." "Am I?" Blaine shot back. "If I ever see him here again, Lila, we're going to have a problem." The memory faded, leaving Blaine with a bitter taste in his mouth. He had known even then that something was wrong. He had felt it in his gut, the same way he could sense danger in a combat zone. But he had ignored it, brushed it off for the sake of peace. Now, months later, that moment felt like a betrayal all its own. Lila had made her choice long before Blaine even realized there was a choice to be made. And Wesley? Wesley had been bold enough to walk into Blaine's home, to sit in his space, and lay the groundwork for his destruction. Blaine's fist clenched at the thought. He wasn't just angry, he was determined. Wesley's betrayal wasn't just personal. It was an assault on Blaine's pride, his dignity, and his role as a protector. The next morning, Blaine confronted Lila. She was in the kitchen, preparing Hazel's breakfast when he walked in. His presence filled the room, the tension palpable. "Do you remember the night Wesley came here for wine?" he asked, his voice steady but sharp. Lila froze, the butter knife slipping from her hand. "What?" "You heard me," Blaine said, stepping closer. "Do you remember it?" Lila nodded slowly, her face pale. "Blaine, that was the beginning, wasn't it?" Blaine interrupted, his voice rising. "That was when it started." "No," she said quickly, tears welling in her eyes. "It didn't start until later. I swear, Blaine. That night was nothing." "Nothing?" Blaine repeated, his tone incredulous. "You were already letting him in, Lila. Into our home, our lives. You opened the door and invited him to destroy everything we built." She sobbed, her hands covering her face. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she cried. "I was lonely, Blaine. You were always gone and you what?" Blaine roared, his voice thundering through the room. "You thought you'd replace me with someone who couldn't even look me in the eye? You thought you'd risk our family because you weren't lonely?" Lila collapsed into a chair, her sobs racking her body. Blaine stood over her, his anger burning bright. "You broke us," he said, his voice quieter but no less intense. "And you let that man hurt our daughter in the process. Do you even understand what you've done?" She shook her head, her tears falling onto the kitchen table. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "Sorry doesn't fix this," Blaine said coldly. "Sorry doesn't undo the damage. And it sure as hell doesn't bring back the trust you destroyed." He turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy against the hardwood floor. Lila's sobs echoed behind him, but Blaine didn't look back. He couldn't. As Blaine sat in his car later that day, his mind raced. Wesley had been clever, methodical even. But Blaine was smarter. He had pieced together the timeline, the lies, the moments that now felt like betrayal in disguise. And he wasn't done yet. Blaine pulled out his phone, scrolling through the contacts until he found the one he was looking for. It was a friend from his military days, someone who owed him a favor. "Hey," Blaine said when the line connected. "I need some help. It's personal." The voice on the other end didn't hesitate. "Tell me what you need." Blaine's lips curled into a grim smile. "I need to make sure someone disappears, for good." The flashback had given Blaine clarity. The truth was out, the pieces falling into place. But the battle wasn't over. Blaine wasn't just fighting for his family, he was fighting for his pride, his dignity, and the promise he had made to himself to protect what mattered most. Wesley thought he could escape, thought he could walk away unscathed. But Blaine wasn't the kind of man to let that happen. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was justice. The air in Blaine's home was suffocating. Each step he took was measured, calculated, and deliberate. The battle against Wesley was no longer just about his marriage, it was about principle, pride, and ensuring that no one who crossed his family would walk away unscathed. As the pieces of Wesley's betrayal unfolded further, Blaine's resolve only hardened. One evening, as Hazel colored in the living room, blissfully unaware of the tension surrounding her, Blaine's phone buzzed. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but something about it made him answer. "This is Blaine," he said curtly. The voice on the other end was low and hesitant. "You don't know me, but I think we need to talk about Wesley." Blaine's grip on the phone tightened, his instincts immediately sharpening. "Who is this?" "Someone who's been burned by him before," the voice replied. "And someone who can help you finish what you've started." An hour later, Blaine sat in the dimly lit corner of a small coffee shop on the outskirts of town. He had chosen the spot carefully, far enough from prying eyes, yet close enough to retreat quickly if this meeting turned out to be a trap. The woman who walked in was in her late 20s, dressed sharply in a fitted blazer. Her eyes darted around nervously before landing on Blaine. She approached, her steps tentative but purposeful. "You must be Blaine," she said, sitting across from him without waiting for an invitation. "And you are?" Blaine's voice was steady, but his gaze was unrelenting, studying her every move. "Rebecca," she said, extending a hand. Blaine didn't take it. "I worked with Wesley. Or rather, I got caught in one of his games." "Games?" Blaine leaned back, crossing his arms. Rebecca sighed, her composure slipping for a moment. "Wesley isn't just a charmer. He's a predator. He finds women who are vulnerable, lonely, overlooked, or undervalued, and he uses them. He did it to me, and from what I've heard, he did it to your wife too." Blaine's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent, letting her continue. "I tried to expose him at work," Rebecca said. "Tried to warn people about the way he manipulates and destroys lives. But he's smart and he's always one step ahead. He's got a way of making people doubt themselves, of turning their own weaknesses against them." "And why are you here?" Blaine asked, his voice cold. Rebecca met his gaze, her own eyes hardening. "Because you're the first person I've met who actually stands a chance of stopping him." "He's afraid of you, Blaine. I saw it in his face when he came back to the office after you confronted him." Blaine tilted his head slightly, his mind racing. This woman could be lying, could be part of some twisted plan Wesley had cooked up. But there was something in her tone, in the fire behind her words, that made him believe her. "What do you want?" Blaine asked. "To help you," Rebecca said simply. "And to make sure Wesley doesn't get away with this. Not this time." Rebecca's information was invaluable. She provided Blaine with details he hadn't been able to uncover on his own. Wesley's financial records, the shady dealings he had covered up, and most importantly, the people he had hurt. "He's ruined lives," Rebecca said as she and Blaine sat in his garage late that night, poring over the files she had brought. "Women, families, even colleagues. He knows how to cover his tracks, but this is enough to destroy him." Blaine studied the papers in front of him, his mind working like a machine. Wesley had underestimated him once. He wouldn't make the same mistake again. "He won't see this coming," Blaine said, his voice firm. Rebecca nodded, her eyes glinting with determination. "Good. It's time someone took him down." The plan came together quickly. Blaine wasn't just a soldier, he was a strategist. He had spent years dismantling enemy operations in the field, and now he was using those same skills to dismantle Wesley's life. Rebecca played her part perfectly, feeding Wesley false information and luring him into a trap. Blaine watched from the shadows as Wesley arrived at an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town, his arrogance on full display. "Rebecca?" Wesley called out, his voice echoing in the empty space. "I'm here," she replied, stepping into the light. Wesley smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "What's this about? You said it was urgent?" "Oh, it is," Rebecca said, her tone cold. "It's about the mess you've made, Wesley. And about the reckoning you've been running from." Wesley's smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" Rebecca didn't answer. Instead, she stepped aside, revealing Blaine as he emerged from the shadows. "You," Wesley spat, his face twisting with anger. "This is harassment. I'll call the cops." "Go ahead," Blaine said, his voice calm but deadly. "Let's see how far you get once they see this." He tossed a folder onto the ground, its contents spilling out, bank records, incriminating emails, and photographs that painted a damning picture. Wesley's face paled as he scrambled to pick up the papers. "Where did you get this?" "I have my ways," Blaine said, stepping closer. "And if you think this is bad, you should see what else I've got." Wesley's bravado crumbled as Blaine loomed over him, his presence overwhelming. "What do you want?" Wesley asked, his voice shaking. "I want you gone," Blaine said simply. "Out of this town, out of our lives. And if you ever come near my family again, I won't stop at warnings." Wesley nodded frantically, his hands trembling. "I'll leave. I swear." "You've got 24 hours, Blaine said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "After that, I won't be so generous." Wesley fled, his steps echoing through the empty warehouse. Blaine watched him go, his expression unrelenting. Rebecca stepped beside him, her arms crossed. "Do you think he'll actually stay away this time?" "He will," Blaine said. "Because if he doesn't, I'll make sure he never gets the chance to hurt anyone again." When Blaine returned home that night, the house was quiet. He checked on Hazel, her small form curled under the blankets, her breathing steady and peaceful. He lingered in the doorway, his heart heavy but resolute. In the living room, Lila sat on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked up as Blaine entered, her eyes filled with desperation. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice trembling. "For now," Blaine replied, his tone distant. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I know I can't fix what I've done, but I need you to know how sorry I am." Blaine didn't respond. Instead, he walked past her, heading toward the stairs. "Blaine," Lila called after him, her voice breaking. He paused, his hand on the banister. "You broke us, Lila," he said quietly. "And I don't know if we can ever be whole again." He didn't wait for her reply. As he climbed the stairs, his thoughts were focused on one thing: his daughter. She was his priority, his purpose. And no matter what happened next, Blaine knew one thing for certain. He would never let anyone hurt her again. What would you do if you had to choose between justice and forgiveness? Could you let go, or would you fight until the very end? The sun had set, casting long shadows across the quiet neighborhood. Blaine sat on the edge of his bed, the house eerily silent. Hazel was asleep, her laughter now a distant memory in the heavy stillness. Lila had retreated to the guest room after another day of tiptoeing around him, her guilt palpable in every glance she threw his way. In his hands, Blaine held a small photograph, a candid shot of him, Lila, and Hazel from 2 years ago. They were at the beach, their faces lit with joy, the sand clinging to their skin as the waves rolled in behind them. It felt like a lifetime ago. He clenched the photograph tightly, the edges bending under the pressure. How had it come to this? How had the woman he'd loved so deeply become a stranger, a betrayer? And how had Wesley, a man who should have been insignificant, wreaked so much havoc in their lives? His phone buzzed on the nightstand, breaking his thoughts. He picked it up, his eyes narrowing as he read the message. "You think it's over, but it's not. You'll regret coming after me. Wesley." Blaine's heart pounded, but not with fear. It was anger, raw, burning, and unrelenting. He had given Wesley every chance to back down, to disappear. But this message made one thing clear: Wesley wasn't done. He stood, his mind already racing with possibilities. This wasn't just about protecting his family anymore. This was about finishing what Wesley had started, ensuring that no threat lingered in the shadows. Blaine moved with purpose, gathering the tools he needed. His tactical vest was snug against his chest, his gloves secure on his hands. He wasn't going to the police. Wesley was clever, manipulative, he'd find a way to weasel out of any legal repercussions. No, Blaine was going to handle this the only way he knew how, decisively and permanently. As he loaded his duffel bag into the trunk of his car, Lila appeared in the doorway. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Blaine," she said softly. "Where are you going?" He didn't answer. "Please," she pleaded, stepping closer. "Whatever you're planning, don't do it. Think of Hazel. Think of what this could do to her." Blaine turned, his gaze steely. "Everything I do is for Hazel. To protect her. To make sure she never has to live in fear. But this," Lila's voice cracked. "This isn't the man I married." "No," Blaine said coldly. "The man you married was destroyed the moment you let Wesley into our lives." Lila's tears fell silently as Blaine got into the car and drove off, the sound of the engine fading into the night. The abandoned warehouse loomed ahead, its broken windows casting eerie shadows on the cracked pavement. Blaine had tracked Wesley here using a burner phone Rebecca had slipped him, ensuring Wesley thought he was meeting a trusted ally. Inside, Wesley paced nervously, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. He was muttering to himself, his usual confidence replaced by paranoia. The sound of Blaine's boots echoed through the space, each step deliberate and measured. Wesley froze, his head snapping up. "You," he spat, his voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" Blaine didn't answer. Instead, he dropped the duffel bag onto the ground and unzipped it slowly, pulling out the crowbar. "You threatened my family," Blaine said, his voice low and steady. "You thought you could walk away, but I warned you. I told you there would be consequences." Wesley backed away, his hands raised. "Look, I was just bluffing, okay? I wasn't going to do anything. It was just a message." "You crossed the line," Blaine growled, advancing on him. "And now you're going to learn what happens when you mess with the wrong man." Wesley stumbled, his back hitting the wall. "You don't want to do this," he said desperately. "You're better than this." Blaine stopped, his chest heaving with restrained fury. "You don't get to tell me who I am," he said. "You lost that right the moment you put my daughter in danger." Wesley lunged suddenly, hoping to catch Blaine off guard, but Blaine was ready. His military training kicked in, and with a swift move, he dodged the attack and brought Wesley to the ground. Pinned beneath Blaine, Wesley's bravado dissolved into panic. "Please," he begged. "Don't do this." Blaine leaned in close, his voice a deadly whisper. "This isn't just for me. This is for every person you've hurt, every life you've tried to destroy. This ends tonight." The crowbar clattered to the ground as Blaine released Wesley,